June 29th, the solemnity of the first apostle, is almost here. On that day, Saint Peter leans out over a shore you cannot see yet, a shore that already has your name written somewhere along it. There is something the apostle searches for in every soul before he turns the key in the lock, something very specific. A single thing that Saint Teresa of Jesus left in writing in her works, with the quiet certainty of one who had seen it in prayer, and that most Catholics repeat in the Creed every Sunday without ever having been told what it really means. If you could sit for the apostle's exam before your hour comes, would you want to know what he looks at first before anything else? That shore Saint Peter leans out over has a detail almost no one names from the pulpit. When the soul arrives, it meets a man. A man who once owned a boat, mended his own nets, watched over a sick mother-in-law, knew the fear of night at sea and the kind of weeping that comes at 4 a.m. And out of everything that a man could ask you, there is one question Saint Teresa of Jesus saw in prayer that he asked first. The question that comes before the other 7. You have already answered it many times without knowing well or badly in every large decision of your life. Before we go any further, do something for yourself. Write in the comments the approximate date of your last confession. Just that, a date. So you know what stones you are walking on as you make your way toward the 29th. What you are about to hear was kept here for you, and only for you, before that day arrives. The night had been long. Peter's hands were swollen and his shoulders bent, and the cold of the Sea of Galilee had been in his bones since before sunrise. He had cast the nets once, twice, 8 times, 20 times. He had pulled them up empty every time. The sun was beginning to climb over the eastern hills, and there he was, his nets spread on the sand, washing them so he could put them away, with the silent anger of a fisherman who knows his family will eat less that week. And that was when Christ appeared. He asked Peter for the boat, so he could preach to the crowd pressing in along the shore. Peter said yes. He pushed the boat out a few yards, sat down, and listened to the Master's voice for a good hour. And when Christ finished preaching, he turned to him, and in a calm voice, he said something that sounded absurd to a fisherman with experience. He told him to cast the nets into deep water. Peter looked at the lake. He looked at the sun, already high. He looked at the nets he had just washed. He knew that in those waters, the fish were caught at night and only at night. He knew that a fisherman with any skill after a sleepless night does not put his hands back into the water at 9 a.m. He knew he was going to look like a fool in front of Andrew and the sons of Zebedee, who were watching the whole scene from another boat. And then he said the line that the evangelist Luke kept like a jewel in his 5th chapter. Master, we have worked all night and caught nothing, but at your word, I will let down the net. That line is the first thing Saint Peter looks for in every soul that comes near the gate of the kingdom. The apostle searches for that mark before he weighs your rosaries, your Sunday masses, or any visible work of charity. He looks to see if at some point in your life, in some specific moment, someone with spiritual authority over you asked something your human reason rejected outright, and you obeyed anyway, without understanding. Only because of the word. Only because it was that person asking. There is the first key to the apostle's exam. Stop for a moment. Think back over the last 20 years of your life. Remember that time when your confessor told you something you did not want to hear, and you obeyed in silence. Go back to that day when your spiritual director, or your parish priest, or your own devout mother with her rosary in her hand pointed to a specific change you needed to make. Letting go of that person. Ending that relationship, returning that money, forgiving someone you had sworn you would never forgive. Think about what you did. If you let the net down at his word, even when your reason was shouting the opposite, you already have one of the criteria checked off. If you stayed there washing your nets on the sand, offended, chin in the air, there is still time to set that right before the 29th. Here comes what few Catholics know about this first criterion. The apostle is looking for absurd acts of obedience. He is looking for the one where you, just like he did that morning in Galilee, looked at the thing being asked of you and said inside yourself that it was a waste of time and a humiliation in front of everyone else, with the added risk of looking like a fool in front of your own family. And you did it anyway, at the word, because someone with spiritual authority said so. That absurd obedience is the print Peter recognizes at once, because it is the same print branded into his own soul from that morning at the lake. When a soul arrives with that mark, the apostle smiles before he looks at anything else. He knows he has one of his own standing there, and there is one sacrament where this obedience gets measured. A single sacrament Saint Peter examines before the other 6, because it is the one that most resembles letting the nets down into deep water when everything inside you is saying no. It is confession. Every time a Catholic kneels in the confessional, he is repeating Peter's gesture on the shore of the lake. There is a master on the other side of the grill, with authority received from Christ himself. There is a word asking to be obeyed, confess. And there is a whole human logic in revolt. The shame rises up your throat. The sharp memory comes back of the last time you confessed the very same thing. Underneath everything, the favorite sin presses like a closed hand on your chest, asking for silence. Everything inside you is saying that the grill is a pointless humiliation, that you already prayed your act of contrition at home, that God understands, that there is no point saying it out loud. And even so, the souls who pass the apostles' exam are the ones who walk into the confessional with Luke's line on their lips, even if without words. Master, at your word, I will let down the net. And when they stand up, they find their nets already heavy, with a peace they did not have before. Saint Teresa of Jesus left it in writing in the interior castle, in the 4th dwellings, where she describes the soul's entry into supernatural recollection. She wrote that obedience that comes before feeling is the ground of all true mystical life. She said so in her own words, without dressing it up, because she herself had spent entire years walking into the confessional with fear and shame, and sometimes with the clear sense that the confessor she had at that moment was not going to fully grasp her, and obeying anyway, the voice asking her to speak. That obedience, the holy doctor of Avila wrote, was the net let down into the deep of her own heart. And every single time, without exception, it came up heavy with fish no fisherman could count. Look at your last few confessions. Look at the date you just wrote in the comments. And let me tell you what the apostle examines next, because it has to do with a particular fall you already know by heart. The wind was in their faces. It was 4 a.m. The lake had risen the way it rises when the winds come down off Mount Hermon without warning, and the apostles had been rowing for hours against waves that would not let them advance. Peter's hands were raw from gripping the oar. Christ had stayed up on the mountain to pray, and they had gone out alone into the dark. They had spent half the night silently asking that he would appear, and then they saw him, a figure walking on the water. The others cried out in fear, thinking it was a ghost. Peter looked hard. Something in him recognized the silhouette of the Master before the others did. But something in him also needed to be sure, and he shouted over the wind that line the evangelist Matthew preserved in his 14th chapter. "Lord, if it is you, bid me come to you on the water." Christ answered with a single word, "Come." Peter jumped out of the boat. For a few seconds, the most impossible seconds he lived through during his time in this world, the feet of the fisherman from Galilee walked on the water as if it were dry ground. He walked. He took a few steps toward Christ, with the wind still beating his face and the waves still rising around him. And then, the way the sacred text puts it with the precision of a physician taking notes, Peter looked at the wind, he looked at the waves, he felt fear, and he began to sink. That fall is the second thing the apostle looks at in every soul. Stop again. Because here is the question that comes before the other 7, the question I opened at the beginning of the video and can finally close. The one Saint Teresa of Jesus saw Saint Peter ask in silence before anything else. The question is this: did you ever dare for me? The apostle does not ask if you were steady. He does not ask if you were perfect. He asks whether you ever, even once, jumped out of your boat for Christ. Whether you ever, even once, put something concrete on the line for Him. Whether you ever left a job, a relationship, a safe sum of money, a social standing, a whole life plan, because in prayer you felt Christ's sake come. Whether at some moment you stepped off the deck where everything was under control and put your foot on water that does not hold a man up. That is the question. Your answer is the first thing the apostle reaches for when your soul comes to the door. There are souls that lived 60, 70, 80 years inside the boat, praying their rosary and going to Mass with devotion every Sunday, dropping their punctual coins in the collection basket, without ever, not even once, having jumped into the water for Christ. Souls who had a specific call to change their state in life, another to forgive someone who seemed beyond forgiveness, another to walk away from a dirty business, one even to give themselves to a hard service that would have cost them the rest of their years, and they chose every single time to stay rowing inside the boat where everything could be controlled and nobody looked at them sideways. Those souls come to the apostles' exam with their hands full of devotions and their feet bone dry. And Peter aches when he looks at them because he knows they could have known the Master whole, and they chose to know Him by halves. Now here is what matters. Maybe you jumped once and you sank, and ever since, you have been carrying around a secret shame nobody knows how to name, not even you in the confessional. The apostle looks at the fall in a different way. Peter was the only one of the 12 who set foot on the water. He was also the only one who sank in front of the Master and in front of the other 11 who sat there in the boat with their mouths hanging open. He was the only one, in other words, who passed the double test, the test of daring and the test of falling while daring. And when he fell, Christ did not abandon him in the waves. The text in Matthew says something very beautiful, one of the most tender sentences in the whole gospel. It says that Christ at once reached out His hand and took hold of him, at once, without waiting for Peter to finish going under so he could teach him a lesson, without waiting for him to recite an act of contrition. At once He reached out His hand and grabbed him by the arm with the physical strength of a carpenter who had worked wood for 30 years and lifted him up into the air while the water ran down his beard. That is why the apostle looks with a particular tenderness at souls who dared and fell. He knows the Master's hand caught them before the water rose to their neck, because that same hand caught him. And on June 29th, he keeps a special affection for souls still living who carry that same mark on them. The mark of the leap and the fall, the mark of someone who dared. Saint Teresa of Jesus left it written in The Interior Castle, in the 6 dwellings, in the central chapters where she describes the moment the soul leaves the safety of consoling prayer and throws itself into the dark waters of pure love without feeling. The Holy Doctor of Avila wrote, with that practical clarity only the mystics shaped by the cross have, that most devout souls stay their whole lives on the edge of the boat, looking at the water, measuring the risk, calculating whether Christ really holds. And only a few leap. Those few, she wrote herself, are the ones who enter the 7th dwellings while still in this life. The ones who pass, in their final exam, the apostle's second criterion, the way someone signs a paper already signed beforehand. And something stays open here that is going to hurt when it comes. There is a specific fall of the Catholic soul that the apostle looks at on June 29th with particular sorrow, and it has to do with the next key in the exam, the key he himself received in his hands before he learned how to use it. Caesarea Philippi, around the year 30 of our Lord. The town sat at the northern edge of Galilee, in the foothills of Mount Hermon, surrounded by caves the pagans had turned into temples to the god Pan and other ancient idols. It was a city dirty with superstition, full of altars and animals being slaughtered for sacrifice. And right there, in the middle of that landscape of false gods, Christ chose to ask the most important question that has ever been asked in human history. He gathered the 12 and asked them first what people were saying about him. They told him what was being said in the marketplaces, that some thought he was John the Baptist, risen from the dead, that others were mixing him up with Elijah, the prophet caught up into heaven, that some identified him with Jeremiah. Then Christ sharpened the question. He looked at the 12 straight on and asked them what they were saying, who they said he was. There was a silence, and then Peter spoke. He spoke without weighing his words, without checking with the others, without quite knowing where the things he was about to say were coming from. He spoke the way a man speaks when his heart is wide open and human prudence has not had time to clamp his mouth shut. And he said the line the evangelist Matthew preserved in chapter 16. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Christ looked at him, and he said what follows with the words the church has been repeating for 20 centuries. "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And to you I will give the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." 5 sentences, 5 ends in a row, like a bridge thrown across in a single motion. And in the middle of the 5, the keys. That is the third thing St. Peter looks at in every soul, the print of the keys. Many devout souls stumble here, and it pays to stop and walk slowly. The apostles' keys are real authority, material, operative, received by the apostle from the mouth of Christ himself, handed down without interruption for 20 centuries to the successors of Peter on the Roman chair, and operative this very minute in the person of the Pope the Holy Spirit has wanted for our own time. Every valid confession in this world, every absolution pronounced in any corner of the planet, every canonization approved by Rome, and every doctrinal definition of the magisterium passes through those keys and through no other door. The apostle looks at the soul and checks whether that authority was acknowledged during life or whether it was set off in parentheses. Ask yourself something, with the honesty of someone who knows the time is getting short. Did you acknowledge the visible Catholic Church as mother, with her bishops, her priests, her Roman pontiff? Or did you live with that subtle attitude, so widespread over the last 50 years, of making up your own version of Catholicism, picking which dogmas to accept and which to push aside? Did you obey the Pope when what he taught made you uncomfortable? Or did you assume from your living room couch that you knew better? Did you accept your parish priest even when he rubbed you the wrong way because he was the one with the keys for your patch of the world? Or did you go shopping for another one who would tell you what you wanted to hear? The apostles' exam falls right here. There are souls who lived in Catholic countries, baptized, confirmed, married in the church. Souls who died surrounded by holy images, with scapulars around their necks and a priest called in for the last sacraments. But they spent their whole lives criticizing the Pope, sneering at the parish priest, snickering under their breath at the bishops every time they appeared on television, and picking and choosing which dogma of the church to accept and which to discard as outdated. Those souls come to the door with the keys broken in their pocket, and Peter, with his own keys whole, looks at them with a sorrow you can almost feel in the air. There are other souls who lived in countries where the Catholic faith was a minority or under persecution. Souls who could barely get to Mass once a month, who received the sacraments in hiding, who prayed in silence while the world shouted them down, but they obeyed Rome with everything they had. They defended the Pope when everyone around them mocked him. They accepted the teaching of the magisterium even when it cost them. Those souls come to the door with the keys shining, and Peter looks at them with the smile of a man recognizing his own true children. The apostles' criterion is plain. Fidelity to the chair weighs more than the number of opportunities you had, and far more than the place you happen to live out your faith. Saint Teresa of Jesus, who lived in the Spain of the 16th century, when the Protestant heresy was tearing through half of Europe, wrote unforgettable pages on this point in The Way of Perfection. The Holy Doctor of Avila said it with the plainness that was her hallmark. She left it in writing that she would have given 1,000 lives, had she had them, to defend a single truth taught by the Roman Church. She left it in writing that she would rather die than hold an opinion of her own against the Supreme Pontiff. She left it in writing that her whole mystical life, all her visions, all her raptures, she submitted without argument to the judgment of her confessors, because they were speaking in the name of the one who held the keys. That iron obedience made her the holy doctor she became. And here comes what is going to hurt at the next step of the exam. Because the same man who received those keys just a few weeks after that scene in Caesarea did something no devout Catholic dares imagine of himself. He denied him 3 times, in a single night, in front of a servant girl and a brazier of burning charcoal. And the apostle examines that night with a detail that changes the destiny of your soul. A rooster crowed in the dark hours before dawn, between Thursday and Friday. The sound climbed up the walls of the high priest's courtyard and slipped through the wall to Peter's ear. It was cold in Jerusalem that night, that dry desert cold of April that gets right through the wool of a cloak. Peter had moved closer to the brazier in the courtyard to warm his hands. A young servant girl, her eyes tired from not sleeping, had looked him straight in the face by the light of the fire and said, "You were also with the Galilean." Peter denied it the first time with a sharp gesture. He denied it the second time with a louder voice. And the third time, finding himself cornered by 2 or 3 men who recognized his northern accent, he swore to God he did not know that man. And the rooster crowed. In that very instant, according to the careful text of the evangelist Luke in chapter 22, Christ turned from the place where they were interrogating him and looked at Peter. Just that. A look across the courtyard, over the soldiers, the torches, the charcoal fire burning in the middle of it all. No gesture of reproach, no word, only the look. And Peter understood everything, all at once, in a single second. He went out of the courtyard. He ran out the way the evangelist describes it without looking back. And he wept. He wept bitterly, the text says. Those are the exact words Luke chose. He wept bitterly. A grown man, a weathered fisherman, a leader of 12, weeping in a street in Jerusalem with a grief that split his chest open from the inside. He fell to his knees in some dark corner of the city. He covered his face with his hands, and he let the tears burn down his cheeks for hours. Those tears are the 4th thing St. Peter examines in every soul. Now I can close what I opened at the beginning. That specific fall, the apostle looks at on June 29th with particular sorrow, as Saint Teresa of Jesus saw in prayer, is exactly this one, the denial. The hour when the Christian soul, out of fear, out of comfort, out of social embarrassment, said with the mouth or with silence that it did not know Christ. Look at yourself with the honesty you can have right now, because nobody else is in the room. How many times in the last 20 years did you stay quiet when someone mocked the Catholic faith in front of you? How many times did you tuck your rosary deeper into your pocket so your co-workers would not see it? How many times did you steer the conversation away from God at the family table because you knew your brother-in-law was going to laugh? How many times during the pandemic or after it did you stop going to Mass on Sunday because it was easier and you never named that specific? small, daily, without a rooster crowing to warn you. The apostle sees them, but the exam does not turn on whether you committed them. The apostle committed them too, in a far graver way than you ever did. The exam turns on something else. The exam turns on whether you wept for them. Here is the heart of this criterion. Peter looks at the soul to see whether at some point in its life it wept over its denials with a weeping that resembled his own that morning in Jerusalem. A weeping that hurt physically in the chest, without pose and without audience, without asking anyone to come and watch. The weeping of someone who discovers, all at once, that he has betrayed the only one who loved him without measure. That is the mark the apostle is searching for. The same mark he himself has carried on his face for all eternity. Saint Teresa of Jesus left a passage in saying, "The way of perfection," in the central chapters where she explains the prayer of recollection in detail, that closes the case on this. The holy doctor of Avila drew a clear distinction between two kinds of weeping in the spiritual life. There was the forced kind, the one a soul makes itself produce in order to look devout, the cosmetic weeping of someone who wants to look good to himself or to his confessor. And there was the other weeping, the kind you do not chase, the kind that comes to the soul like water coming down off the mountain, without your having asked for it, without your being able to stop it. That weeping, Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote, is the unmistakable print that grace has touched the bottom of the wound. And that weeping, she wrote, is never forgotten in all eternity. It stays carved in the soul like a scar made of light. She knew it because she had lived it in the oratory of her convent, as she wrote in the book of her life. In chapter 9, when an image of the scourged Christ brought tears out of her without warning that left her on the floor for hours with her soul made over. Peter looks at the soul searching for that scar. If he finds it, he knows the soul has crossed the same threshold he did. And here is something you can still do before the 29th. This very evening before you go to bed, look back over the last week, the last month, the last 3 small daily denials you can recognize in yourself. And let yourself weep over one of them, just one, in silence, away from everyone, without writing a single word on any social media. Just you and Christ in the room. Those tears, if you let them run without trying to tame them, reach the apostle before June 29th. And he receives them with a smile, his own weeping eyes, after years of practice, learned to recognize among thousands. And there is still one more question, deeper in. A question Christ asked Peter 3 times after the resurrection, on the shore of the lake at sunrise. That question is the next thing the apostle carries over to every soul. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" The voice came from the risen Christ, sitting beside a charcoal fire on the shore of the Sea of Tiberias. A few weeks had passed since that dawn in Jerusalem. Peter had gone out fishing with the sons of Zebedee and 3 others, partly from nostalgia, partly because he did not know what to do with his life after the tears. He had spent the whole night on the lake catching nothing. And at dawn, on their way back, they saw a man on the shore who shouted to them to cast the net on the other side. They cast it, almost out of habit, and the net came up with so many fish they could not pull it out of the water. John was the first to recognize the Master, and he said to Peter, almost into his ear, "It is the Lord." Peter threw his tunic on, jumped into the water, and swam to shore. By the time he got there, Christ had lit a charcoal fire, almost identical to the brazier from the night of the denial, and was grilling fish for all of them. They ate, they spoke little. And when breakfast was over, Christ took Peter aside, away from the others, and asked him that question the evangelist John preserved in chapter 21, with one precious detail. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Peter answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Christ said, "Feed my lambs." But it did not end there. He asked him the same question a second time, in a slightly different tone. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter pressed back, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Christ said, "Shepherd my sheep." And then came the third time. And here is the finest wound in the entire gospel, because when Christ asked him the third time, he no longer used the great word. He changed the verb. He came down to the level where Peter actually was. And he said, according to the original Greek text preserved by the evangelist John, "Do you love me with the love a friend has? Simon, son of John, do you love me as a friend loves?" Peter was saddened, the evangelist tells us, because he understood. 3 questions, one for each denial of that dawn. And the third one, asked with the very word Peter himself had used in his first 2 answers, as though Christ was saying gently, "What you have is enough. I will come down to your size." Peter answered, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Christ said, "Feed my sheep." And in that line, he handed him the care of the universal church for 2,000 years. That threefold question is the 5th thing the apostle examines in every soul. The criterion here changes in kind. The 4 before it looked at specific actions: blind obedience, the daring of the leap, fidelity to the keys, real tears. This criterion looks at the engine that drives every action. It looks at love. Real love, measured in the actual life of the soul, far from the sentimental kind people feel on Sunday morning, while the organ is playing and the incense fills the church. Saint Peter asks your soul exactly what Christ asked him. "Do you love me more than these?" And the word "these" is the question behind the question. These means more than your work, more than your home, more than your weekend hobbies, more than the comfortable affection of your family, more than your own peace and quiet in retirement, more than your own mental ease. Do you love me more than all of that? If you love me more, I will know it from what you put in second place during all the years you lived. Stop again. Look at your life as a map spread out on the table. What is at the center? What actually held first place in your thoughts, in your worries, in your free time, in your dinner conversations? Was it really Christ? Or was it something else with a Catholic varnish on it so it would look like Christ? Here many souls who think themselves devout take the finest blow of the whole exam. Souls who prayed a great deal over the years without ever realizing they were loving the calm of keeping God satisfied more than they were loving God himself. There were those who went to Mass every Sunday, loving, without noticing, the steady weekly routine more than the Eucharistic presence they were receiving on autopilot. And there were souls who attended their prayer group for decades because they loved the social belonging of the group more than the face of Christ in the middle of them. Real love, the kind of love that weighs in the apostles' exam, is measured by what you gave up for him, by what you let go of for him without thinking twice, by what you chose against your own taste when nobody was looking. Peter learned this the hard way, in a single dawn in April. That is why he asks it so calmly. Saint Teresa of Jesus left a thought in the book of her life, in the chapters where she describes the soul's transforming union with God, that is worth keeping whole in your mind on June 29th. The Holy Doctor of Avila wrote that on the last day, the only thing that will truly weigh on the scales is the works seen through the love with which they were done. And she added, with that practical clarity she always had, that many souls who looked great in the eyes of the world will look small before the apostle, and many souls hidden in the kitchen of their own home or caring for a sick person for 40 years will look great, because they loved much, even if nobody in this world saw them loving, and even if no newspaper ever printed their names. And something stays open here that touches what comes next. Loving Christ, as he himself told Peter 3 times on the shore, comes out in something specific, feeding his own. And that gesture is what the apostle looks at next when the soul comes near the door. Look at the hands of the apostle. during the 30 years he lived after that morning on the shore of the lake. You will see them breaking bread in Antioch, handing out coins to widows in the courtyard of the temple in Jerusalem, carrying a sick child in Joppa, washing the dusty feet of a slave who had just been baptized in Caesarea. The hands of the first pope, the ones that received the keys from the very mouth of Christ, were above all hands that fed others. Because that threefold question on the shore of the lake turned, as soon as breakfast was over, into a threefold commission, the evangelist John gave us word for word: feed my lambs. Shepherd my sheep, feed my sheep. Christ told Peter that true love is measured in something specific, giving the people you have been given something to eat, giving them food literally with bread in your hand, taking responsibility for the Master's little ones, bringing them His word, bringing them company, bringing them comfort on the hard days of the year. And that is the sixth thing St. Peter examines in every soul that comes to the door. The criterion here, my friend, is one of the most dreaded among devout Catholics, because the apostle does not ask how many times you went to Mass. He asks how many of his wounded lambs you gave food to when nobody was watching. Look at your life. Look at your calendar over the last 10 years. Look at the money you earned and where you sent it. Look at the free time you had and what you spent it on. Who are the specific people with first and last names whom you yourself fed? The elderly woman in the apartment upstairs who lives alone. The nephew in trouble you called once a week. The friend back home you sent packages to at Christmas. The man from the parish who lost his wife and whom you invited over for Sunday lunch. Those names, one by one, are the lambs you were given to shepherd. The apostle remembers them better than you do. Many souls clear this criterion easily, and others lose it for a single reason: they were never able to step out of themselves. They spent their whole adult lives tangled up in their own affairs, their own illnesses, their own family disappointments, never with time to look at the lambs the Lord had placed close to their door. They went to Mass, of course. They prayed the rosary with devotion, of course. But they were not feeding anyone in particular. And it grieves Peter more than any other loss, because he knows this was the easiest one to live out. And here comes the surprise many pious souls get when they were not expecting it. There are people who come to the door of the kingdom without having been especially devout in the traditional sense. People who barely made it to Mass because life did not allow it. People who could not pray more than the Our Father they half learned at school. But people who spent their whole lives feeding others. They cared for sick parents for 15 years straight and never complained. They took in orphaned nephews and asked nothing back. They gave work in their little business to men nobody else would hire. And they brought hot meals every week to the local nursing home for a solid decade. The apostle looks at those people and, as Saint Teresa of Jesus saw in one of her prayers, opens the gate wide before they have finished presenting their papers. Because they loved the Master's lambs in the most real way you can love anybody, by giving them food. Peter remembers it well. He himself, before he became the universal pastor, was a hungry fisherman who knocked at many doors asking for bread during the Master's preaching tour through Galilee. He knows the weight of a loaf received from kind hands. And he knows at a single glance the soul who gave from that loaf to whoever asked, and the soul who shut the door, saying he had his own things to take care of. Stop for a moment and make a mental list right now. 5 specific people, still alive, you could call this week before the 29th. 5 lambs of the Lord you have near you who are a little lost. The sick neighbor downstairs, the son who walked away from the faith last year, the lonely cousin in the old hometown, the divorced friend you barely talk to anymore, and the colleague at work who just got a diagnosis, the one nobody has called yet this week. Call them this week. Send them something, a small box, a token that says they are not alone. Cook a hot soup for them if they are ill and bring it over yourself. Do not wait for them to come to you for help. Get there first. The gesture will reach the apostle before the 29th, and it will tip the scales in your favor in a way you cannot imagine right now. Saint Teresa of Jesus left a thought in the book of her Foundations, in the chapters where she describes how she organized the life of prayer in each of the convents she opened across Castile. That is worth reading slowly. The Holy Doctor of Avila used to ask her nuns to remember each morning before mental prayer that concrete charity towards the sick sisters of the convent itself counted for more than any prolonged spiritual rapture. She repeated to her daughters that a well-served bowl of soup given to an elderly sister weighed more in heaven than 3 hours of consoling prayer. She said so because prayer without the soup was barren prayer. Prayer with the soup was fruitful prayer. And the apostle agrees on that scale, and something stays open here that is going to seal what comes next. There is a gift Peter received in body and soul 50 days after the resurrection, when he was gathered with the others in a closed room in Jerusalem. And that gift still blows on the souls that come to the door. It is the 7th criterion of the exam. Peter saw a flame settle on the head of Andrew, his brother, before he noticed it on top of his own. 50 days had passed since the morning on the shore. It was the first Sunday of the Jewish feast of Pentecost. The 12, together with Mary the mother of the Lord and a group of disciples, were gathered in a large room on the upper floor of a house in Jerusalem. They had spent days praying, waiting for something the Master had promised before he went up to heaven without quite knowing what was coming. And then it came. First as a sound, according to the text in the 2nd chapter of the book of Acts. A sound like a strong wind filling the whole house without a single window moving. Then came the light, and the light took shape. Tongues like fire, the physician evangelist Luke tells us, were distributed among them and came to rest on each one above each head, without heat, without scorching the hair, but burning with a fire no apostle had ever seen before, and every one of them was filled with the Holy Spirit. Peter was the first to stand. He walked out of the room with the others behind him. He went down the stairs. He came out into the street, where a crowd of pilgrims from many nations had already gathered for the feast. And there, the same fisherman who 50 days earlier had denied knowing his master in front of a servant girl, preached for the first time with a firm voice in front of thousands of people. 3,000 were baptized that day, according to the evangelist's careful count. The seal of the Spirit had come down on him. That seal is the 7th thing the apostle examines in every soul that comes to the door. The criterion here shifts in tone. The 6 before it were looking backward at what the soul did. This criterion looks at the fruits, at what the Holy Spirit did inside the soul. Peter is searching for the print of the fire of Pentecost, the mark of the baptism confirmed by confirmation, yes, but above all, confirmed by a whole life that actually let the Spirit move. Stop and walk carefully here. Many Catholics receive baptism in infancy, confirmation in adolescence, and First Communion somewhere in between. And then they live 60 or 70 years without ever letting the Holy Spirit move inside their soul. They keep him sealed inside, idle, like a flame trapped under a glass jar. And when the hour of the exam comes, St. Peter looks at the jar and sees that the fire is still there, but smothered for lack of air. It pains him to look at what he sees. The soul that has been truly sealed carries specific marks the apostle picks out in a second. Those marks are the fruits of the Holy Spirit the apostle Paul lists in his letter to the Galatians: charity, joy, peace, patience with others when they hurt you, gentleness in the face of those who insult you, spontaneous kindness toward whoever is worse off, faithfulness in small things over many years in a row, and self-mastery without needing somebody else's applause. When a soul brings these fruits to the exam, the apostle smells them from far off. They are the fragrance of the Spirit on a life that let itself be cooked by him for decades. Stop and look at your life with a single question. If a stranger had to size you up by the fruits of your daily dealings, without knowing you were Catholic, without any access to your interior spiritual life, what would he say? Would he say you are a peaceful, patient, cheerful, kind person, gentle when insulted, in command of yourself when something bothers you? Or would he say you are tense, critical, easily irritated, hard, domineering, with a sharp tongue every time a touchy subject comes up? The difference between those two descriptions is the difference between a soul truly sealed and a soul sealed only on the parish certificate. St. Peter looks at this difference with a particular sorrow because he knows it from the inside. He spent an entire stretch of his apostolic life struggling against his hot temper and his quick tongue, against a tendency very much his own to argue without restraint in front of anyone. He learned this on the road and on his travels, in the arguments in Antioch with Paul, in the hard days in the Roman jail. And only after many years did he begin to bear visible fruits of the Spirit he had received in that upper room in Jerusalem. That is why he now looks with mercy at souls who struggle their whole lives against an inherited weakness of character and keep improving slowly, year after year, without ever quite giving up. Saint Teresa of Jesus described this whole criterion without knowing she was describing the Apostles' exam in the final chapters of the book of her life. The Holy Doctor of Avila had received in prayer the very high grace of what she called the spiritual marriage, the transforming union of the soul with God in the seventh dwellings. And she wrote that the surest sign of that union, above ecstasies and visions, above bodily raptures, lay in something far simpler and far more demanding at the same time. An interior peace that held steady without trembling through the daily contradictions of convent life, from the difficult sisters and the humiliating letters from the papal nuncio to the chronic illnesses of her own body. That peace, Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote, was the seal of the Holy Spirit really at work. Without that peace, everything else was devout noise. The apostle measures the same way. Without daily peace, there is no seal he can recognize. With daily peace, the gates open, and something stays open here that is going to come as a surprise. There is one last gesture from the apostle, the most intimate of them all, the one that settles the final millimeter of the judgment before he turns the key. A gesture Peter signed with his own death, 65 years after that morning on the shore of the lake. That is where we are going now. 65 years after that morning on the shore of the lake, Peter is in a Roman cell near the Colosseum. He is in his 70s. He had been preaching in Rome for a long while. He had founded the church in the very heart of the empire. He had written 2 letters the Universal Church still reads every year. And now, in the middle of the persecution Nero had unleashed against Christians after the fire of Rome, they had arrested him in a small house in the Trastevere neighborhood, where the Christian community used to meet. They brought him to trial. The sentence came quickly: death by crucifixion, like any common criminal from the provinces of the empire. They took him out of his cell that same night, loaded him with the crossbeam, and led him to the hill the Romans called the Vatican, outside the walls, next to a circus then under construction. They reached the place of execution. They laid the crossbeam on the ground. And then Peter made the request the church has remembered for 20 centuries. He asked the soldiers, with the tired voice of a man who has been walking for 30 apostolic years, to be crucified upside down. "Do not crucify me as my master was," he said, according to the tradition the fathers of the church kept. "I am not worthy to die the way he did." The soldiers looked at each other. It was a strange request, but they accepted it. They drove the nails through his feet up at the top and his head down at the bottom against an upside-down cross sunk into the sand of the Vatican Hill. And there, looking at the world the wrong way up, with the blood running slowly to his brain, Peter handed over his soul to his master from Galilee. That upside-down cross is the eighth and last thing St. Peter examines in every soul. The criterion is called humility, but it pays to understand it properly, because the word has been worn thin by use in pious sermons. The humility the apostle is searching for is far from the cosmetic humility of a man who says small things about himself, while inside he thinks himself great. Real humility is something much more exact, the truth about yourself accepted deep down in the soul, the clean awareness of how much you received and how little you earned, the capacity to die upside down, grateful because you know you were not worthy even of dying well. Peter understood this that night in the sand of the Vatican, and ever since, he examines every soul with that measure. Look at your life one more time, my friend. Do you think yourself better than the other Catholics in your parish because you pray more and receive communion more often, because you go to more spiritual retreats than your neighbor? Do you think yourself entitled to judge the priest, the lukewarm neighbor, the nephew who walked away from the faith, the corrupt politician, without seeing the giant beam in your own eye? Does it bother you when others get more attention than you in your prayer group, or in your family, or at your parish? Are you, even though you would deny it inside, fishing for others to recognize how good you are? Every time your answer is yes, you move 1 millimeter away from the upside-down cross on the Vatican Hill. There are souls who come to the door of the kingdom with the 7 previous criteria checked on paper. They obeyed their confessors with docility, and they dared in their day for Christ. They defended the Pope when the time came, and they wept over their daily denials. They loved Christ with small gestures. They fed the wounded lambs around them, and they bore visible fruits of the Spirit. And even so, they lose the final exam on this point. They never reached true humility. They came to the door convinced, in some hidden corner of themselves, that they had earned the kingdom. And the apostle, with sorrow, asked them only one thing: did you think yourself worthy of the kingdom? If the answer is yes, the soul stays outside the time it takes to finish purifying that last hidden pride. There are other souls who come broken, with the 7 previous criteria half fulfilled, with long falls and chronic lukewarmness, with sins that mark them for years. But they come with a total conviction: I deserve nothing. I have received more than I could ever pay back. And so I ask to be let in, by the mercy of the Master who saved me. To those souls, the apostle opens the door at once, because they are in the only posture from which anyone enters the kingdom, the posture of the upside-down cross. Saint Teresa of Jesus left it in writing with luminous clarity in Yam. The interior castle, in the 7th dwellings, in the final chapters of the whole book, where she describes the spiritual marriage of the soul with God. The holy doctor of Avila had come, after 40 years of mental prayer, to the conclusion that closes the whole of her work. Humility is the foundation on which all the other virtues are built, and without it, the others come crashing down as soon as the wind of trial begins to blow. And she wrote that the soul that truly enters the 7th dwellings is the soul that sees itself as very small, a child of pure mercy, with the daily awareness that without God, it could not hold itself up for a single second. That awareness, the holy doctor said, was the apostle's final exam before the door of the kingdom. And here I close what I opened at the beginning of the video. The apostle's question, what he looks at first before anything else, has its full answer right now. He looks at humility. He looks at it at the start, underneath the absurd obedience of Galilee. He looks at it at the end, in the posture of the soul asking to enter the kingdom. And he keeps looking at it in the middle, in every one of the 6 criteria between, like the dust of humility holding up every gesture. That is why June 29th, the solemnity of the apostle, is the feast of humble souls, of the souls who learned the way he did, to look at the whole world the wrong way up. The apostle is already looking at your soul with the slow attention he gives his own. He has seen you sitting in that chair, your phone close by, listening to one word after another without getting up to do something else. And that small gesture, that fidelity of an hour stolen from the ordinary day, already counts toward the exam on June 29th. The souls who give time to preparing the gate of the kingdom before they cross it are the souls the apostle keeps with special care. You are taking something concrete with you this evening. You are taking, sorted in your heart, the full exam of the first apostle, the 8 criteria he uses on every soul that comes near the gate of the kingdom. The blind obedience of the man who lets the net down into the deep even when human reason is in revolt. And beside it, the leap into the water for Christ when the boat was the safer place. The fidelity to the keys of the Roman Church when the world laughs at the supreme pontiff. The genuine tears over the small daily denials. The love proved by what you gave up for him. The bread shared with the wounded lambs you had near your door. The fruits of the Spirit visible in your daily dealings. And above them all, the final humility, that upside-down cross that opens the whole kingdom. You are taking with you the message of Saint Teresa of Jesus, received in prayer by the Holy Doctor of Avila. The message that says, with the mystical authority the Church herself has guaranteed, that the Apostles' exam is a look of recognition more than a cold judgment. Peter is searching in every soul for his own print, the print of the man who fell and wept and loved and obeyed until he died upside down. If he sees it on you, he opens the door at once. If he does not yet see it on you clearly, he waits with patience. And you are taking with you, above all, a new peace in your chest. The peace of knowing that June 29th is coming as a date of quiet preparation, and that the hidden fear so many Catholics carry around about it no longer has to touch you. The apostle who holds the keys of the kingdom is the same one who asked to die upside down, and therefore he understands every fall of yours from the inside. That peace was what you needed this evening, and that is what you have received in full. And now comes the most delicate moment of this hour we have spent together. Because your heart is awake, it is softened, it is open to receiving more light. And that is exactly what heaven takes advantage of when it finds it. Do not close this interior door yet. Stay with me a little longer and let me tell you why. June 29th is almost here. And after the 29th come days, just as loaded with grace, feasts in the Catholic calendar, where heaven bends down over devout souls with intensity. Each of those dates carries revelations received in prayer by Saint Teresa of Jesus, by other mystical saints of the Roman Church, by the Mother of the Lord herself through chosen souls. Each one asks for a quiet preparation on your part, and each preparation is a step on the invisible ladder you have been climbing this evening without realizing it. There are souls who come to the 29th with their whole heart ready, exactly the way you are arriving now, and they stop there. They go back to their routine, to the hurry of the next day, to the troubles at work and the family disappointments of always, and they let the light they received this evening grow cold in some forgotten drawer of the soul. And when heaven opens again, on the next great date of the calendar, it no longer finds them ready. They have to start over from the beginning. And most of them, out of weariness or distraction, do not do it. Do not be one of those souls. It would be so easy to stay right here, close your phone now, and go back to the same pending things as always. But heaven has given you something. This evening it did not want you to lose. And that something needs a second step right now. It needs continuity, for you to keep listening without a pause to what the Lord has prepared for you. Think about this too. This hour has not been an accident of the day. Your phone opened up to this particular word for a reason only heaven fully understands. Your soul, without your knowing it, asked to be prepared for June 29th with intensity. And the Lord heard that silent request and brought you here slowly without your noticing. What happens next depends on whether you accept the next gift He has already prepared for you, or you let it go by, thinking this evening was enough. The great souls of heaven did not arrive in the kingdom with a single teaching received on one June evening. They arrived with hundreds, with thousands of words heard day after day across a whole life, never once thinking they already knew enough to enter through the gate. Saint Teresa of Jesus spent 40 years in mental prayer, reading the doctors of the Church and receiving spiritual letters from nuns all over Castile. And she still said at the end of her life that she was beginning to learn the most important thing about the Christian life. That attitude of never tiring of learning, that hunger for more of the Word, is the attitude the Apostle looks at with special tenderness in every soul. It is the attitude of the lamb that comes near the shepherd every morning with its head bowed, asking for more. Be that lamb right now. Stay with me a little longer. There is something prepared for you that follows directly on this very conversation without your having to look for anything yourself. All you have to do is let yourself be carried into what comes next. It is the word heaven chose for you even before you opened your phone this evening. And you will find it there, waiting quietly for you as soon as the blessing that comes after my voice has finished. There is another mystical revelation waiting for you before the end of June. A saint who comes up soon in the Catholic calendar brings with his intercession a very specific gift for the souls who have just taken this exam of the Apostle with me. And there are pages of Saint Teresa of Jesus on the other doors the soul crosses after the gate of the kingdom, doors few Catholics ever imagine, and which the Holy Doctor described with a precision that still helps today. That light has been chosen by heaven to come after the one you have just received, because the two together make one complete spiritual medicine for your soul over the difficult days ahead. Do not rush to close yet. There is a soul hidden away in the history of the Church the Holy Spirit wants to introduce to you tonight before you go to bed. Stay where you are, take a deep breath, and let what comes next come to you on its own. And before another second goes by, receive what this friend wants to leave with you as a final embrace. May the Lord give you the gaze of Peter to see your own soul with the clean truth the Apostle asks to see. May He give you the tears of that dawn in Jerusalem, the real ones, the ones that wash clean without wounding. And may He give you also the leap onto the waters when your hour comes, the Master's hand reaching out at once as you begin to sink, and the humility of the upside-down cross, which is the only posture from which anyone enters the kingdom. Saint Teresa of Jesus used to say, with the plainness of a Castilian nun, that God alone suffices. God alone. Keep that line with you tonight. Tuck it into the pocket of your soul for the hard days that will come. God alone suffices. And everything else, including the date of June 29th and the whole exam of the Apostle, settles into place around that truth like small pieces of a mosaic, remembering their original design. I leave you here at the door of your own home with the peace of someone who knows heaven is waiting for him with patience. Until very soon, beloved soul of the Lord. Until very soon.